community. If there's anything to learn from the story you're about to hear, besides being careful with skepticism that borders on carelessness, it's that we must be very careful about who we associate with and in whom we place our trust. What's the worst story you know about infidelity? I bet none compares to what you're about to hear. Turn off the lights and let yourself be carried away. You're now listening to Tales of the Night. Hello, Uriel. Hello, community. What I'm going to tell you happened in my country, Venezuela, in the state of Táchira, where I'm from. Some names will be changed for privacy. Everything occurred in 2017, when I was barely 19 years old. At that time, I was in a relationship with my ex, Ruben. During the time we were together, there was never a shortage of infidelities, and despite always finding out, I would end up forgiving him, believing that with the power of my love, I would change him. That year, Ruben was going through the process of joining the National Police, right at a time when my country was going through one of the darkest and hardest stages of the economic crisis we've been experiencing for more than 20 years. Getting what he needed to start his career was costing us a lot. Due to the migration and socio-political crisis of the time, we knew that many police officers had resigned, so acquiring second-hand equipment was the best option. That's how Ruben decided to post in a local Facebook group that he was looking for special boots he needed. About a week later, Ruben told me that a couple of days before, a woman had written to him offering the boots. I was happy and asked if he would buy them, and he, somewhat nervously, told me that the woman had asked him to come see the boots to make sure they fit him, to close the deal, but had specified that he should come alone. This seemed very strange to me, but he assured me that he hadn't gone and didn't plan to. Supposedly that was it, but I was left wondering why he was telling me this 3 days later. Still, I didn't investigate further. A few days later, an old elementary school classmate contacted me through Facebook. Despite being from the same town, I hadn't seen her in a long time, as I had gone to study high school in the city. I was very happy to reconnect. She was one of the few friends I had in elementary school. However, I must admit that it seemed a bit strange that she contacted me, since although I had great affection for her, I knew I was quite indifferent to her, but I was very happy to hear from her. We were talking for a few days when she invited me to a party the following weekend. She told me it was something private among her close friends, that they would welcome me warmly, that it would be the perfect opportunity to reconnect, and that it would be great if I came with my boyfriend. We lived in a small town, so I wasn't surprised she knew I had a boyfriend. I was very happy, and of course I accepted the invitation. On the day of the party, my friend received us very warmly, and then introduced us to her friends, including the homeowner, Maris. She was an older woman than us, old enough to be our mother, but she introduced herself with great joy, affection, and hospitality. For the rest of the party, I felt a bit uncomfortable since my friend was isolated with her boyfriend for long periods of time. I didn't see her much, and even assumed they might be arguing. I tried to socialize with the other people, while my boyfriend seemed to get along very well with everyone. When the party ended, we just said goodbye and left. According to me, it would be the last time we would hear from them, since I didn't feel comfortable at all. I simply felt it wasn't my environment. Not many days later, Ruben confessed something that was quite uncomfortable for me. The homeowner, Marisa, was the woman who had offered him the boots and had asked him to come alone to see them. I asked him why he hadn't told me that day, and according to him, it was so I wouldn't feel uncomfortable, so I could enjoy the moment, the reunion with my friend. He also tried to calm me down by saying that he didn't think this woman had any bad intentions with him, since she had a husband who, although not home much due to his work, was at least there the day of the party. Once again, I chose to believe his explanations. At least 2 or 3 more times, we went out with that group again. Now it was my friend's friends whom we met that night who invited me, and my boyfriend always insisted that we go. Of course, Marisa was always present at these outings, but I never wanted to show insecurity. One night like any other, Ruben and I were at my house and we were getting ready to sleep. That night there was a very strange atmosphere, like dry, but somehow we attributed it to tiredness. We didn't know what was about to happen. Ruben was already in bed, and I was about to turn off the light when, very thoughtfully, he said, "It smells like my mom's perfume." Ruben's mom died when he was 13 years old, so I thought it was a very sad comment. I just hugged him and lay down beside him as usual. Before sleeping, we started talking about various things. A few minutes had passed when suddenly Ruben fell silent. He wasn't responding to anything I was saying. I asked if he was okay, but he still wouldn't respond. I moved him thinking he might have fallen asleep, but something made me feel that wasn't it. The room was very dark, so I put my hand under the pillow to get my phone and turn on the flashlight. For some reason, my phone wouldn't turn on. It felt like an eternity passed until finally the light came on. And when it illuminated Ruben's face, what I saw was the beginning of a nightmare. Ruben had the biggest smile I had ever seen on his face. Disproportionate. It seemed like a mocking smile in which all his teeth were visible and covered much of his face. It was a completely unnatural smile. His eyes were completely dilated, giving the impression of being entirely black. He wasn't looking at me. He seemed to be staring into infinity. Out of fear, I could only say his name, Ruben. And he started laughing without separating his teeth. He turned his gaze toward me, then turned it toward the entrance of the room, while his smile disappeared, while his face now reflected terror. With a gasp and a strong inhale, he sat up suddenly in bed and began to cry. He began to cry very desperately. At that moment, as if by impulse, I got up from the bed and turned on the light. Ruben was crying like a child, covering his face with his hands and crying completely desperately. I just hugged him, and we stayed like that until he managed to calm down. That night, he didn't want to tell me what had happened, but we couldn't turn off the light. A few hours later, he fell asleep, but I couldn't anymore. In the morning, Ruben was quiet and downcast, but I needed to know what had happened the night before. Finally, he began to talk. Ruben said he didn't remember much or didn't understand well what had happened. The last thing he remembered was talking with me and suddenly feeling very cold. He said that suddenly, as if in a nightmare, he felt he was in another place. He couldn't see it. He could only feel it. He could still hear my voice talking to him, but as if it were underwater, and above it, he heard many voices of laments, people crying, begging for help. The next thing he remembered was seeing himself back in bed and seeing next to us, standing the silhouette of a woman dressed as a bride who left the room. That's when he regained consciousness. Without a doubt, it was an unprecedented situation in our lives, so we didn't know what it meant or if it could happen again. As you can imagine, that day we decided to believe it would be a one-time thing and didn't investigate the matter further, as if by not thinking about it, by not repeating it, it would simply be erased and become a bad memory. Still, for my part, I told it to my friends with whom I had a WhatsApp group. Luckily, they took it very seriously, so much so that they offered to accompany us to talk with the priest of our parish. But since Ruben and I had decided to believe it wasn't necessary, we didn't do it on that occasion. Exactly 1 week later, Ruben stayed at my house again, and that night, by chance, my best friend Adrian was also going to stay. We planned to watch movies until late, but as night fell, the atmosphere in the room again felt very strange. There's no other way to describe it. It's a dry sensation, of aridity. Ruben and I noticed it, while Adrian said he didn't feel anything strange, although we could tell he was lying, that it was hard for him to breathe, that it hurt. Being already alert, I sent a message to my friend's WhatsApp group, warning them that I was feeling something strange again. We pretended to watch a movie, but it was evident that none of the three of us was calm. We turned off the TV and decided to try to sleep. Ruben and I were in the same bed, while Adrian was in another one in the same room. After a few minutes of pretending to sleep, I began to hear Ruben making noises, as if he was complaining very softly. I turned to hug him, to ask him what was wrong. But while I had my arm over him, I could feel how he was sliding down toward the foot of the bed, as if he was slipping. I yelled at Adrian to turn on the light, and he ran to do it. When he turned it on, this time, Adrian and I could see again that same face I had seen the week before, Ruben's face. His eyes completely dilated, black, from which tears now ran down the sides of his face, and that same smile without any proportion, with clenched teeth, from which somehow a laugh came out. He had his hands joined above his head and his legs almost completely out of bed, as if something had been pulling him out of it, pulling him by the feet. This time I had more time to react. I asked Adrian to get the holy water that we always have at home by family custom. While I joined Ruben's hands on his chest, centered him on the bed, and began to pray. Adrian came running back with the water and we started putting it on his face, and we could see how Ruben's features changed again. From that evil smile, his face changed to one of terror. His eyes moved in all directions as if looking for something, and he was thirsty. His mouth was dry, he wasn't able to articulate words or hold his gaze on any point. We kept giving him holy water to drink, but at times his evil features would return. That mocking laugh. And at that moment my phone rang. One of my best friends was calling me. Adrian answered. It was approximately midnight and the caller was Celestina, who said she felt an uneasiness she couldn't explain and just wanted to know if we were okay. Adrian told her no, that what I had told them the week before was happening again. Celestina hung up the call and contacted the others, and they all decided to pray from their homes to help us somehow. Meanwhile, Adrian and I continued praying. We kept wetting Ruben's head with holy water while fighting against his attempts to break free, and right before our eyes we could see how one of the pillows was thrown across the room, as if someone had thrown it with force. Ruben, or whatever had taken possession of him, began to laugh, which made me look at him, and those dilated eyes in his face looked at me fixedly with an evil look, so much so that I felt great fear, like one who sees evil straight in the eyes. But I also felt a kind of anger and dared to ask, "Who the hell are you?" I wasn't really expecting an answer, but I got one. Ruben responded, in a kind of aspiration, and with that, he reacted again. He sat up forcefully in bed, looked around with eyes wide open, and began to cry desperately. We were calming down. Adrian took the opportunity to let Celestina know that everything had calmed down. Even the room felt different. When Ruben could talk, he told us the following. I don't know what's happening, or how to explain it. Today was worse than a week ago. It's like I fall asleep, but suddenly I find myself in another place, on a dirt road, and I'm being dragged by a woman who has me tied by my hands. I only see her back. She's wearing a long white dress. She's the same woman I saw leave the room a week ago. And in that place, I feel a lot of heat. And I hear many voices crying, asking for help. But today, I heard your friends' voices, especially Celestina's. I heard her praying. Adrian and I didn't know how to react. We didn't know what to say either. We had never experienced anything like what happened that night, and we didn't understand what was happening or what we should do. But we were determined to investigate the next day. This wasn't something we could ignore or pretend wasn't happening. That night we took turns sleeping and couldn't turn off the light. We couldn't do it for a while. The next day we had decided to go talk to the priest of our parish. We were very close to the church and had a good relationship of trust with him. After lunch, we met with Celestina, who wanted to accompany us to talk with him. When we met her, we told her everything that had happened the night before. Ruben especially told her that he heard her voice and even repeated the words he heard from her mouth. Celestina could give credit to what Ruben was telling her. Every word he said was exactly the same as the prayer she had made during that episode. Words from Celestina's heart, not structured prayers, but desires. Her conversation with God. The priest of our parish was a good-natured man, already quite elderly, one of those stubborn ones with a strong character. Most of his priesthood he had exercised in villages remote from towns, in places where the mystical, where the magical, intertwines with the religious. Perhaps we didn't know it, but this would be of great help to us, since a conventional priest, more attached to his customs, to the Catholic faith, might not have given us the information that Father Jesus gave us. That afternoon we arrived at the parish house without notice, and without an appointment, but always well received due to the trust we had. At first I thought we were going to spend time as we had done before, while we sat down to have coffee with bread and laugh for a while with him. But then he could realize that we were seeking help, that something was happening that we didn't understand. We described to Father Jesus everything that had happened to us, every detail. When we finished, he remained silent for a while. Then he looked at Rubén in a scolding way and asked him, "Which witch did you get involved with?" Rubén didn't respond, but his attitude was that of a trapped mouse. Adrian and Celina looked at me, and then we all looked at the father with the same question on our faces. Father Jesus began to explain. "What you're describing is a soul. It's the lonely soul, María Celestina. That's why it's happening on Mondays. It's the day when souls are asked for and candles are lit for them. The lonely soul is called to bring back the loved one who left. She torments them and makes them desperate until the person returns to the arms of whoever called her. Rubén, you must know who is doing this to you, and now getting rid of this work won't be easy at all." While Father Jesus was speaking, I could only think about how it was possible that Rubén's infidelities were affecting us to this point. Somehow this time I felt the betrayal even more heavily. Father Jesus gave us some steps to follow to begin Rubén's healing and promised to accompany us in the process. He also explained that the smell of Rubén's mother's perfume on the first night meant that she perhaps came there to protect him or to warn him of what was to come. When we arrived home, Rubén, who had been silent the whole way, decided to step forward and talk about who he believed was behind all of this. It turns out that Maris, the woman in boots who welcomed us to her house at that party, was the person Rubén thought could be doing everything. According to his deceitful words, Maris never stopped insisting that he come see her with any excuse. He supposedly never did, although on more than one occasion, she called him late at night declaring her love and proposing casual encounters. According to Rubén, the last call had been approximately a month ago, when she, angry and drunk, assured him that it was his last chance and that she would make him regret rejecting her. In my mind, I had a kind of lapse. Many things came to me. They started to make sense. Unanswered calls and even unexplained absences from Rubén, which for me had Maris as the main reason. I didn't believe for a minute that Rubén never succumbed to this woman's invitations, but I could understand that perhaps Maris wanted to take some revenge against him for not leaving me. For some reason, despite so many infidelities, Rubén never left me, and when I tried to leave, he wouldn't leave me alone until we got back together. While Rubén rambled asking for forgiveness, I could no longer hear him. My mind was beginning to understand so many things, like that friend who invited me to the party at Maris's house and never approached me again. Surely everyone in that social circle knew what was happening, except me. I had surely been the laughingstock of everyone. And now what was I going to do? I asked Rubén to leave. I needed time alone to think, to feel everything I had to feel, as an isolated event during those days without Rubén. My mom told me something that had happened to her days before. She said that while getting dressed very early to go to work, she saw a woman pass by her room, or the silhouette of a woman, who was wearing a long dress. She got quite a fright, but attributed it to still being a bit sleepy due to the hour. And she wasn't sure what she saw either. And at that moment, I didn't connect the events. Despite not seeing each other during those days, Rubén wouldn't stop insisting that we talk, swearing to me that nothing had happened, begging me not to leave him alone at that time. He said he couldn't sleep at night, and it wasn't because of heartbreak. When he was falling asleep, he felt his bed being roughly shaken, waking up, preventing him from falling asleep regardless of whether it was night or day. And well, the truth is that I've always been one of those people who put others' well-being above their own. These words made me feel very bad. I felt like I was abandoning him at a very difficult time. And with the paranormal topic, I've never had doubts about whether it exists. I've always thought that in life we're taught to face anything, except this. Spiritual threats. Monday was approaching again. My lack of self-love, self-respect, added to that toxic empathy, prevented me from leaving Ruben alone that night. Luckily, my friend Selena thought the same and proposed that we stay at her house. Selena's house had a very particular structure, with a space in the middle like a hallway, which allowed Selena's room to be sufficiently isolated from the others so as not to bother the rest of the family if we needed to make noise. Besides, it was big enough for several people to stay, which was a great relief for me, because now, in addition to having witnesses to what was happening, I would also have support. And that night we gathered for what we thought would be a spiritual war. Selena, Adrian, Aile, Fidelina, Samuel, Maggie, Ruben, and I. Although we knew why we were all there, that night started like any other friend gathering. Perhaps in denial, or to lighten the mood, we were joking and laughing. We made dinner, shared with Selena's family, then said goodbye and retired to her room. And there we were talking. But before midnight, one by one, they fell asleep. Despite being young, fatigue overcame them. Around 12, only Selena and I were left whispering among ourselves. I couldn't or didn't want to sleep due to nerves about what was about to happen. And Selena knew it. That's why she was keeping me company. While we were whispering, we began to hear a whimper, very soft. We realized it was Ruben, who was sleeping beside me. We fell silent and I moved him a little, hoping he was just having nightmares. While my hand was on his shoulder, I felt Ruben's body slide down sharply, and again I heard that laugh, that mocking laugh as always. I shouted at Selena to turn on the light, and she got up quickly to do it. The shout woke up the rest of our friends, and as if in a horror movie, we had to see through a mirror that was in front of Ruben, how he was alone, with his head raised, with completely black eyes, and with that disproportionate smile, with that unnatural smile on his face. The same mocking laugh came from him, although he didn't separate his teeth, but rather pressed them, grinding them while looking at us through the mirror, as if his only intention was to scare us. Then he dropped his head against the bed, raised his arms above his head, and joined his wrists in the same position he had done the last time. Everyone quickly knew what to do. And while the women started praying, the men helped me hold him, while I positioned myself on top of him, while I began to sprinkle him with holy water while praying. That night in particular, the struggle seemed harder than any other. Ruben's body started to slip from our hands, despite being held by two men, despite me practically sitting on him. And this time, in addition to that mocking laugh, what was inside him spoke to us.
Let me go. Let me go. I'm going to take him.
I dared to ask, where do you want to take him?
With her. I'm going to take him.
Who is she? Who sent you?
Her. I'm going to take him.
Ruben's body slid in jerks as if someone was pulling him. All my friends kept praying, and again I dared to ask, who are you?
Maria.
Which Maria? What Maria?
Maria. Celestina.
Upon saying these words, Ruben regained consciousness. In a deep sigh, like someone who was drowning, his face returned to normal. He began to want to break free and get up. I can't take it anymore. I can't take this anymore. I can't anymore. I can't anymore. Together we managed to calm him down, to calm ourselves down too. Every time these events happened, those present were left with a feeling of tiredness, of desolation, of disturbance that kept us silent for a long time. like processing what happened, like trying to understand or believe if we were really living this horror movie. The next day, during breakfast, one of Selena's aunts who lived in that house approached us. She asked us amusedly what we were doing last night. We looked at each other worried that someone might have heard the commotion, that they might have been bothered, and we asked her why she said that. "Well, which one of you dressed up as a bride?" I got quite a fright when I went to the bathroom and saw her entering Selena's room. The color drained from all our faces. We lost our appetite. We couldn't even answer her. We just changed the conversation. And that's when I realized what my mom had told me, that she had also seen her at home. This horror nightmare was so palpable that outsiders, people who didn't know what we were living through, were witnessing it, understanding that this was more than a passing scare. We knew we had to fight a battle, and both my friends and I were willing to face it alongside Ruben, who was the main affected one and who needed to prepare the most, strengthen his spirit, free himself from that. But the opposite happened. From that day on, Ruben started to distance himself from us, to ignore us. The 2 or 3 nights he stayed to sleep with me, I witnessed that it was true, that the bed moved when he fell asleep. That managed to wake me up too. He started blaming me for what was happening. He said it was my fault, that it was because he was infatuated with me. He began to treat me badly and we started arguing a lot because of that. And he would simply leave. The following Mondays he would go spend the night at the cemetery, sleeping on his mother's grave. He said he felt safer there than with my stupid attempts to help him. Little by little he deteriorated. He looked thinner, his eyes sunken. He started to neglect himself and even began to walk hunched over. For my part, I also started to distance myself, to feel repulsion for the way he treated me, and for the first time I started to feel an enormous rejection for all the times he had failed me, lied to me. That December I ran into him at a town party. He looked very bad. Even so, he was holding hands with another woman, and upon seeing me let out a mocking laugh and tried to come hug me. I didn't let him. I extended my arm, marking the distance without saying anything. He put on a face of disbelief and laughed again. But it was such a different laugh, like evil, harmful. That was the last time I saw him. Shortly after, like many in my country, I immigrated. Over the years, rumors about him occasionally reach me. They told me that he had fallen into a spiral of problems, that he had made many enemies, and that, if that wasn't enough, he had fallen into substance use and made no effort to hide it. After the years we spent together, in which I so many times allowed mistreatment, infidelities on his part, something came with this entity that took him away from my side, to a dark place. But me, community, it pushed me to a better place. Thank you very much for your patience, for listening to my story. I hope that in addition to entertaining you all out there for a while, what I just told serves someone. Have a very good night.